Our third panel today is about to begin. We're going to look at the future of innovation. It's my pleasure to introduce Chris Darby, CEO of In-Q-Tel, and to moderate a conversation with Stacey Dixon, the U.S. Principal Deputy Director for National Intelligence, David Van Weel, Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges at NATO, Andre Loesekrug-Pietri, Chairman of the Joint European Disruptive Initiative, and last but not least, Appelbaum, the Chief Scientist of Israel and the Chairman of Israel's Innovation Authority, who will be joining us virtually. Please join me in welcoming to the stage.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and it's nice to see everybody back from lunch. Obviously, you know that any good summit always holds the best panel right after lunch, just to draw people back from lunch. We're here to talk about the future of innovation, and it's a real pleasure for me to be here with the panel today. I think you're going to find it to be a fascinating conversation around not just innovation, but more importantly, I think the process of aligning the interests between public and private sectors. And I think some nations and some regions do that better than others, but I think there are lessons to be learned all the way along. But before we dive into it, it's my pleasure to do a deeper introduction. Stacey, I'm going to start with you. You may not remember, but we met 16 years ago. And at the time, you were a staffer with the HIPSI, and I was CEO of In-Q-Tel. And then you became IARPA director, you were deputy director at the NGA, and now you are the principal deputy director of national intelligence for the United States. So one of us has had a really good career over the last 16 years. My next guest, David, thank you for being here. David is the Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges at NATO. He has responsibilities in his Alliance for New and Emerging Challenges, including cyber, hybrid threats, terrorism, AI, quantum computing, energy security, data policy. You also have the Division for Science for Peace and Security Programs, I believe. I'm surprised they didn't put world hunger into that mandate.
Climate change is on my list.
Climate change, he does have, all right. Prior to that, David was the Chief of Cabinet for the Ministry of Defense and the Permanent Secretary. Interestingly, he started his career with the Royal Netherlands Navy, and so has got a service background. Andre is the chair of the Joint European Disruptive Initiative, better known, I think, to a lot of us as JEDI, which is the European ARPA, and they launched their first DARPA challenge in 2020, I believe. David, prior to that, was the special advisor to the French Minister of Defense, and he's got a formidable career across private equity for a number of years. And so you've seen both sides of the equation, and we're looking forward to your lens on that topic. Our final guest is Appelbaum, who joins us virtually from Israel. Ami is the Chief Scientist and Chairman of the Board of Israel's Innovation Authority. He had a long and storied career at KLA. Prior to this, I think 22 years, his last job being the Vice President and the President of KLA Israel. I think for an old telecoms guy such as myself, most importantly, Ami was a member of the tech staff at Bell Labs long ago in Murray Hill. And for those of you who are so young you don't remember Bell Labs in Murray Hill, we'll tell you a little bit more about just how formidable an organization that was. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about how the relationship between government and the private sector has evolved over the years. Interestingly, if you think about it, post-World War II, there was really good alignment between the private sector and the national interests, both in the United States and I would say in Europe as well. And over time, it seems like the interests have not been as well aligned. And in fact, they've perhaps been divergent on occasions. And so I think one of the things that we want to begin with teasing out over the course of this conversation is, how do we create that alignment once again? How do we frame a conversation with the private sector that allows us to align interests in a vision that is mutually beneficial, both in the national security realm, but also for the greater societal good? So with that as an introduction, though, I'm going to start, Stacey, with you, and obviously we go way back, so I'm going to lob a softball at you to start with. When you think about the DNI and the DNI's perspective on innovation, how are you thinking about prioritizing that, and what are you really looking for from a trends perspective that would indicate you're being successful?
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. And yes, I remember meeting you 16 years ago. The way that we look at innovation in the intelligence community, it's a must-have. Nothing stays static in the world, let alone when you're trying to gather information from the world. The types of things that we're looking at haven't changed that much over time. We're always looking for, what are the new collection opportunities out there? How do you have better sensors that can collect information from farther away, sensors that are more sensitive? But what really excites me is how we're going to start using the advanced compute to analyze all of the information, all of the data that we're bringing in from the various sensors, from the various collection modalities. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, of course, are hugely important. How do you apply them within our community? How do you make sure that you can scale them to the amount of information that's coming in so that they can produce those very dynamic responses, being able to go from data to intelligence to the policymaker in shorter and shorter timelines, data wherever it's needed, anywhere in the world, in more secure and faster timelines? Those are the things that are going to be constant for us, but those are the places where I see technology moving us in the future. So we're really excited about that. I think in some of the areas where we certainly see a lot of innovation right now, space, cyberspace, biotech. These are areas where there's a lot happening in the world and industry, and we know that we not only need to keep up, but in some places we need to be able to lead the way in figuring out what that right balance is going to be. Because one of the things that I think has caused some of the divergence is that our needs can be very niche, can be such that what we need is not necessarily a great opportunity for larger sales, either in the country or worldwide. But how do we balance the fact that we desperately need to continue to work with industry, but what we need may be a smaller subset of the types of things that they want to produce and that they're going to be able to sell more broadly?
We'll come back to that. I want to get your opinion on how talent factors into all of that at a certain point. But let me turn, David, to you. When you launched the new innovation fund and Diana, the Defense Innovation Accelerator, what was your intention? Why did you do it, and how's it going right now?
Good question, and
all
almost
right.
a moral question. Why did I do it? No, I think innovation wins wars. It always has. So maintaining your technological edge in order to outsmart your opponent is a game that's been around as long as innovation has been around. And for decades after the Second World War, that was not an issue because most of the big inventions actually came out of defense research and development. The internet, the computer, GPS, duct tape, just to name a few brilliant ones. And that has changed over the past two and a half decades, I would say. So we see that innovation is no longer driven by the defense industry. It's no longer driven by the public sector. It's still happening, though. We still have the best universities in allied countries. We still have the most Nobel laureates alive in allied countries. We still have the most venture capital investments being done in allied countries. It's just not making its way into the defense sector anymore. And that's the solution that Diana and NATO Innovation Fund aim to bring, to reach out to those young innovators that are creating these new technologies, these EDTs, these startups, making defense more approachable to work with, showing them what the problems are that we're working on in the defense world, and what they might have the solutions to without dictating what kind of solution that should be. And then you need to back that up with, put your money where your mouth is, and that's where the Innovation Fund comes in. Because these companies need to live and be able to grow. So the NATO Innovation Fund will actually take equities and make those companies flourish from a dual use perspective. Let me emphasize that. We're not looking to build a new generation of defense industry. Most of these technologies have a dual use character, and that's what keeps them agile and keeps them innovating. And we just want to tap into that potential and make them work with us.
So I want to come back to a little bit later how you make sure that the money you're investing does not corrupt, because money corrupts and government money corrupts absolutely. So how do you make sure that these companies actually create a dual use perspective? But before we do that, let me go to Andre. Andre, tell me a little bit about JEDI's tech agenda. How do you stack, rank, and prioritize? Technology is such a broad area today. How do you think about prioritizing your efforts at JEDI?
Thank you very much, and great to be here. And first, thank you to Eric, Ely, and the whole team for inviting me. It's great to be here. I would like just to start with one of the points that Jake Sullivan made this morning, which I think is very important. I think it was the second or third point about the talent, the STEM talent. And I want to build on what David just said on the incredible talent that you have in Europe. The reason we're doing JEDI, and coming to your question about prioritization, is we are some kind of a unknown political object, and probably at the core of this discussion on relationship between public and private. We basically came to the conclusion, and it's not a pessimistic conclusion, it's just a realistic one, is that working on the next big thing, prioritizing the key challenges of tomorrow is a battle in itself. Changing government, the way government operates, executes, invests in technology, keeps the pace with this always faster innovation cycle is another battle, and it's one battle too much. Former director of DARPA told me, I won't mention who it is, told me if we were to create DARPA today, it would be probably crushed by the administration. I don't know if it's true or not, but basically we executed upon that and we said we're going to create an ARPA without a D, and maybe we come back to that why, outside as a foundation. And in this way, we are very close, I think, in the mentality of the SCSP. The prioritization, actually, it seems to be the most simple. It's actually the purpose. I mean, we see that on one side, you have the camp of the regulators, if I oversimplify, those of the technology for technology, the techno-optimists. And what we decided to do is basically to examine what are the big challenges of our time that can be explained also to our citizens. This is climate and energy. This is obviously healthcare and pandemics. We call that human-centric digital, and I'm very interested to hear that there's a lot of discussion on the privacy component, because if you want to make it work, if you want to use the data, if you want people to share the data, they need also to be confident. And within these missions, then we try to identify what are the topics with the biggest societal, geopolitical, and economic impact. So we have a competitive component in that. And if you allow me a minute more, the Vice President of the European Parliament, who happens to be also a good friend, Eva, gave you a little bit the setting. Let me give you probably a less politically correct situation of where Europe is. Because if I hear a lot, friends and allies, but if we want to be friends and allies, you need to have friends and allies who are strong and possibly as strong as you are. Otherwise, the relationship is very unbalanced. And today, the situation is extremely grim. I mean, just in the last 5 years, Europe's cloud market share went from 30 to 15%. Nothing to do with the mandate of the French president, but that was exactly at this time. Secondly, we came to orders of magnitude, 3 launches of Ariane last year, 31 of SpaceX. I mean, it's 10 times more. On the semiconductor, I don't have to tell you the situation. On AI, on biotech. I mean, one of the co-inventors of CRISPR is a French scientist working now in Berlin, but 99% of the startups on CRISPR are either in Boston or in Shenzhen. I mean, That, to my understanding, maybe it's not exactly that number. And so we have an issue that we are totally losing the technological war. And I think a first good policy is to be recognizing what is the situation. So the call for action, and I think I heard the senator being a bit impatient about the implementation. We are not. I love the punchline of General McMaster. Let's stop creating these venues for discussions. They are important, but let's get into real action. Let's use, for example, the Transatlantic Technology Council, which I think is missing any kind of concrete to launch joint projects together. And I think innovation is a perfect venue to do that. And I think we missed an opportunity with the 2 parallel CHIPS Acts. Why don't we invest in neuromorphic computing? I mean, really the next big thing that will not also address, that's one point. The second thing, I heard Jake Sullivan talking about the revision of the export control, and might not be also nice to hear, but as long as among friends and allies you have extraterritorial laws, or at least perceived as that, which acts I'm referring to, there will always be a pushback. And I think it's actually working against American interests, obviously against European interests, but also, and I think this balance needs to be, but I'm really hopeful, because I think that what happened, especially since February 24th in Europe, is really a recognition that technology and innovation is at the core of the way our societies, political opinions are shaped. We talked about that in previous panel, how it's playing on geopolitics. I mean, we saw that with 5G, we see that very clearly now, and how much is obviously an economic aspect. And what we should avoid at all costs is a country like Germany, who made huge strategic mistakes with Russia, is now rushing into electric engines and windmills without offshore windmills. And for those who know that topic, they all know that they are filled with rare earths, neodymium, dysprosium. 97% of that comes from China. If we think we're dependent on Russia, let's just wait. And I think there are great China experts in the room. China is going to use that. And I think Condoleezza Rice said it very eloquently. So there's a call for action to be pragmatic, action-driven. I believe in successes, in quick wins, and they are possible now. Let's use this crisis and this time of reckoning to have stronger transatlantic ties.
So we will come back to any one of a number of the 50 points and try and dig into those a little bit more. I think specifically I want to pull on the call for action and how you do that across different nations. But Ami, let me turn to you. Israel's been called the startup nation. You don't seem to have an issue aligning the national interest and the commercial interests all that much, or at least from the outside looking in, it would appear like you don't have a lot of challenges there. How do you pull that off? Aside from the obvious, it's not like there isn't an ongoing robust conversation politically within Israel, but and yet at the end of the day, you seem to be able to always bring public and private interests together to serve the nation. How do you do it?
So thank you very much for inviting me. I would like to thank the chairman of the Special Competitive Study Project, Eric Schmidt, and the organizer. Yes, we do have here an interesting system of public-private partnership, which compose multiple ingredients in this secret sauce, if you like. There are some positive, constructive element and some kind of messy element. There is no silver bullet to how things work. But let me give you a few numbers about what is the impact of high-tech on Israel economy and on Israel national security. Today, 15% of Israel's GDP come from high-tech. 25%, quarter of the income tax is coming from the high-tech industry in Israel. And 54% of Israel export is coming from the high-tech industry. All of that done by only 10.4% of the workforce. So something is really, really a big impact on Israeli economy and national security. How you live together and cooperate so constructively with the government I would say the belief by the government and by the organization I'm heading, Israel Innovation Authority, that the government should enable and not control. And that you can create if you separate, I would say, to a large degree between investing in the private sector, which Israel Innovation Authority does based on budget, about $500 million that we get annually, but the decision is made by a board of directors, which is 5 government representatives and 3 public representatives, and they are independent of how they make decisions. Politicians cannot dictate, minister that or other minister, how the money will be distributed. And if you build a very structured processes, you can avoid the corruptions. 500 million, that institution of chief scientists in Israel is 50 years old, but it keeps changing its structure and function as the global economy changes, as Israel is changing. The second element that the government must invest in is education. You cannot expect your high tech to be ahead of the rest of the world if your education system in elementary school, high school, academia is not one of the best in the world. You need to be very careful and very minded on heading into investing in future technology. Future technology, the private sector still will not invest, but academia, researchers, Israel Innovation Authority, meaning industry, will tell you today is a time to invest in infrastructure, in quantum computing, quantum communication. Don't let anyone else to be ahead of you in those areas. When I say anyone else, of course, Israel and the US are partners. There are other else that I mean to them. Bioconvergence, climate. And then the last point that you need to come from the private sector, but you need to channel it into the government, is enabling regulation, not a stopping and aggressive negative regulation, but enabling regulation using a sandbox and creating sandbox that enable the private sector to go back to the government, test a new component, a new autonomous car, a new drones systems, and go and implement it globally. Now, there is also an element of what I call the country culture. If you look on the overall secret sauce of Israel's success, I would say creativity, not to become followers, the debate culture that comes from Jewish heritage and the Talmud, for those of you who know what it is. Some of you know the Israeli chutzpah, but there is a lot of positive in it, but a lot of negative. It's come together. You cannot try to stand in Israel on the bus line, see where you get to. But that's what creating innovation, very, very vibrant society and high tech. We have also another element is the multinational companies. Israel has more than 400 multinational companies. You cannot find today any Silicon Valley or other large companies that don't have research and development in Israel. And we welcome, I worked for many years, 22 years in one of them, KLA. And then the whole area of necessity. Necessity is how we set up this Israel, refugees from the Holocaust, surrounded by very friendly countries for many, many years. Only recently with Abraham Accord, we truly have, without quote unquote friendly, but real friendly countries. So let's drive the whole Israel society into to be the best. If you are not the best, everyone else, investors, high-tech companies have other options. They need to come to the best, they're looking for the best, and that's what drives all of us. 2 more points that I want to make that the government enabled here in Israel is the fund of VC. So fund of VC, we have more than 700 different institutions, funding institution in Israel, and the organization I'm chairing, which is Israel Innovation Authority, as I said, investing government fund, but defined by a group of experts into research and development in the private sector with high opportunity, high risk, disruptive technology where private companies still don't want to invest. And last and not least is the way that we live and our surrounding. We have a compulsory military service. Military service makes a big impact because you take 18 years old kid, instead of going to college and have fun, he goes to the army. He get a gun, he have to make a life and death decisions. He works in a platoon, he works in a team, and he getting exposed into top technology. When he out of the army after 3 or 5 years, going to school, he is all vibrant and already very mature and ready to take his study on a fast process and go into the market. And I will be happy to enlarge if there is. Finally, Israel and US are partner when we are facing a very challenging situation with those who don't share, like us, the democracy and the same value that we all share. And we cannot afford to be the second. We got to be the first, and jointly we can make it.
So there were a number of things there that we will want to come back to, and it's my understanding this panel is now a 5-hour panel. So buckle in. I think Ami mentioned a word, Stacey, that I want to unpack a little bit with respect to talent. Someone once said, okay, maybe it was me, that innovation without creativity is just iteration. How do we think about developing talent and the flow of talent in and out of public service? Because to me, that underpins, as Ami pointed out, everything else we do. If we don't have the right talent supporting us, we won't succeed. How do you think about it at the DNI?
No, I'm glad you mentioned the talent going in and out of government, because for a very long time, we would try to attract talent in and then give you your 30-year career. And that's just not going to work for a number of people that frankly don't want that. They want to try different places. They want to be in the public sector for some part of their career. They want to be in the private sector. They want to have the ability to go back and forth. And we are moving our models to be able to do that better. We don't make it easy for people to get in. We don't make it easy for people to get back in. And so we're recognizing that and trying to work on the timelines and how we can do things, whether it's holding clearances longer when people go away, but definitely not making it a barrier for them to come back in. The part that's challenging is, it'd be one thing if it was just us trying to attract talent. Of course, we're competing with industry on this one, or we're both challenged in the same way. And there are individuals who will be more attracted by some of the things that industry has to offer. I still think that being in public service, whether it's for a little while or your career, is a very worthwhile thing. There are a lot of missions and a lot of challenges that you will solely work on in the government. And by having interns come in and kind of see what we're about, we're very successful in getting people to come in, even though they know that they could make more money somewhere else. We should not try to hold on to them forever. Some will be intrigued by the work and want to stay and have enough opportunity to move around that it's great, and others will say, this is great, I want to now go see what's on the other side. We definitely need to figure out how do we get the universities and schools to produce more talent, period. That will benefit all of us, and that is something that, frankly, there's not enough of. There's too many jobs that go unfilled in the technical fields because there's just not enough students going into them and coming out with graduate degrees or undergraduate degrees or even certifications. We have to make science and technology in particular more attractive, make sure that the students coming out of it feel supported, feel like there are opportunities for them. And even though it's hard, it's worthwhile. So there's some things that need to change in the way that we kind of produce our students. But in terms of how we're bringing them in and out of government, we're definitely seeing that we need to be doing that differently. I think also letting them know that there's an expectation that if you come in, it is your creativity that we want. We don't need you to come in here and play it safe. That is not going to help any of us. We really need to figure out how to incentivize the taking of risk, prudent risk, and that's something that I think we've struggled with a bit. There are too many no-fail missions or too many very high security, high counterintelligence threats that make us put things and do things in a certain way that don't necessarily support that creative aspect. We need to figure out how to make it all work together, and we're trying.
So I'm going to make Ely's blood pressure go up and go off script. Stacey, you've got an undergrad from Stanford, and as I recall, a PhD from Georgia Tech. Why did you go into government service?
It wasn't part of the plan initially. Frankly, a recession caused me to open the aperture of places I would consider working because industry and even academia had slowed down hiring. But the government, to its credit, still hires during a recession. And I came back home to DC after working on my postdoc, realized that even though I was from here and was surrounded by government, surrounded by the intelligence community, surrounded by national security, I really hadn't paid attention when I was younger to that being a possible place that I wanted to work. Sort of got reacclimated here, realized that I had all sorts of family friends who were in this community. And one of those questions that someone asked, are you hiring? The answer was yes. And so when I started learning more about the community, I got excited by it. They couldn't tell me what they were doing, but they were so excited to talk about what they could. And I went ahead and applied. So it was sort of accidental. I was on an academic path until I wasn't, and found myself my way in, and it'll be 20 years next year.
And we've got a recession going for us, so we should be able to we should be able to get people into public service. David, coming back to this notion of dual-use technologies and so on, what's the motivating factor for someone? And at In-Q-Tel we have this, because when we target people, they are not generally doing any business with the government. So why would they want to take money for a dual-use track? What is it that makes that a positive incentive for the people you're targeting with your funds?
It's a good question, and I think it's a very changing landscape. We discussed this before we got on stage, but it's only a year ago that the European Commission was thinking about a taxonomy that would put defense industry in the same category as tobacco firms and big oil. So it will make them difficult for them to even have a bank account. I think that's shifted a lot. I think that the new generation is very motivated to contribute to the public cause. That's at least what I notice within my division, with the people that come to me. They're talented and they want to make a difference. And I think that the war in Ukraine now also shows them that technology and making a difference in defense for the good cause is necessary. So I expect that we will see a lot more interest from the community by itself, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to make sure that we do the right outreach. If you go into a military facility, then it doesn't feel very welcoming if you're a young startup. And you get stopped at the gate, and then you have to be searched, and then they check your passport, and you put in the wrong date of birth, and then you go back out. That just happened to me at the White House, to be honest. So
you're not alone.
We're not inviting as a community. So we need to create touch points where we can engage with these startups. And I'll give you one very concrete example of where we're missing opportunities, and that is a startup that we encountered that was working on precision navigation in GPS-denied environments. Well, that's a military puzzle that we've been working on for years and decades, and they had a really working technology at around TRL4. The reason they developed that technology was because they had read that Walmart had a problem with the tin-roofed logistic warehouses and autonomous vehicles inside. So you can't tell me that you're more motivated to solve that issue for Walmart in their warehouses than to create new opportunities for our militaries to be more resilient. I think we have a great mission, but a lot of people don't know what our mission is.
So Andre, I want to dig even deeper into this now. What is the rallying cry that helps bring together these communities? So in the United States, we hear a lot about the race with China. I have my own opinions on whether that's actually effective with our private sector. I don't think it is, personally. Right now, you've got the war in the Ukraine. Are there other more aspirational things that we could be thinking about to bring the interested parties together?
Well, maybe let's make one comment. You need an American and a forum in Washington that two people, we have a challenge on quantum positioning system, David, so it's good that you make the connection here, so we need to talk more. And another little thing, we French, we love to talk about submarines. guess why. I would like to go against this term of dual use, because I think this is actually creating the silos. On a submarine, I think, except maybe the hull, the steel which is at the front of the hull, everything is civilian or military. So talking dual use is just creating artificially these, and let not recognize, I mean, again, Jake's comment on how do we protect our IP, we need to be much more clear that all technology can be weaponized. And coming to your point, it's a sense of purpose. I think, when you have a very big German company, a chemical company, I won't name who it is, that does 50% of its business in China, 80% of its growth, and probably more than 100% of its profit. The rallying cry against China is a difficult one, not because there's not the recognition. It's just because it's unpragmatic. I think, at the contrary, the fact that democracies are under threat, that we thought, for a long time that we were living in this peaceful environment in Europe. Again, it's an opportunity. This terrible war which is going on our. I mean, 2 hours. I mean, it's closer to go to Lviv from Berlin than to London. Just to give a sense how close it is. I think it's an opportunity to really realize that democracy is super fragile. And to the question of the previous panel, I'm personally rather pessimistic, because I don't see that we realize that we face an existential threat. And if if in the government circles and if it's society, we are not able to actually, what are authoritarian systems today? They have this capacity to, at least they claim, to think long-term, the famous China 2025 or 2049 vision, etc., which we, by the way, buy without any sense of maybe challenging that. And then they used to be super good, and I think Xi Jinping destroyed that, super good at the execution. They were the ultra-pragmatism, right? And how do we build in long-term thinking into our government? And that's why, there are a lot of people either in active duty or in reserve in this room. That's where I think the military has a role to play, because in our democracies, it's the only budget which has this kind of multi-year planning. And I think we need to expand that to education. We need to expand that to many other topics around research and development. And maybe to the previous point connecting to that, on talent, again, there's an opportunity. These young people that on Friday evenings were demonstrating on climate, how do we turn that anger into, sense of purpose? And I completely agree with you, no better place than public service. And we see so many people wanting to join the reserve. The problem is, and I hope the Air Force Chief of Staff is in town right now, so I hope he will not hear that, so please keep it but you need 9 months to go in the reserve in France. It's terribly, I was the only one in the cabinet of the Minister of Defense that was not having a civil servant career. When I entered, I needed to sell my stakes. So I can tell you my partners were very happy. I had 1 month to negotiate. And then when she got, when the ministers change, the whole cabinet leaves, then you have no place to fall back, right? I think these are the little things that we need to improve. And I'm worried when I hear that you think that it's difficult. This system of revolving doors, we need to manage the conflicts of interest, but facilitating this going back and forth from NATO to private sector to startup, that's how we get this diverse approach to a complex world. Otherwise, you have this business approach, or you have this policy approach, or you have this think tank approach. I think that is something we in Europe need to learn, I think, from this country.
I want to ask you a little bit about aligning funds. As a couple of, I'll be kind, seasoned telecoms engineers, you and I probably think of things from an architectural perspective, a systems engineering perspective, if you will. Again, from an outsider looking in, it looks like Israel is really good at filling the white space with government funds in order to enable a solution at that systems level. How does Israel look for the gaps, and how does it think about applying its funds strategically to augment something at that solutions level over a long period of time?
So most of the funds to Israel is actually come from overseas. More than 70% of the fund, and last year there was about $29 billion invested in Israeli high-tech. Vast majority came from foreign investors who found Israel as an attractive place to invest. In the government, the separation, I would say, between the private sector, the high-tech, and the government using an organization that is separate legal entity, and decisions are made absolutely professionally after a deep evaluation of every application. I can tell you that in Israel, we got more than 2,000 applications last year, and we evaluate each one of them on a very predefined merits on how you define who will get the money and who will not, and eventually getting by a committee, which I'm chairing, but again, have a government representative and public representative to make the decision. But that's not, so the government is a very small fraction of the overall investment. And we do make sure that we put the money of Israel Innovation Authority where we see a market failure, where on one end, or where we see infrastructure for technology in the future. And it's the end, I would say, of expert, of professional expert, and we use many, many advisors to help us. The other element is how do you create other funds like institutions that will come and invest in the Israeli high-tech. Foreign institution, which came, as I said before, with a large number. And surprisingly, actually, the Israeli institution and the pension fund did not invest in Israeli high-tech, which may surprise you, but they did not. They were too scared from the 2000 collapse and the market failure. So the government, we came to the government and say, how about we give some security to the Israeli institution that if they invest for like 8 years, if they will lose some money, the government will compensate or give them some security for partial of their investment. I don't want to elaborate too much on the details, but a lot of creative thinking on how to, what I call, increase the pie of the fund that's coming. And the government is, after the 27 billion, 500 million that the government provides to us, it's nothing.
So American private equity firms are funding the innovation in Israel. That's a good leverage model. I don't know how we replicate that here in the United States, but that'd be a great leverage model.
The leverage, if we work together, and what is being created in Israel, quickly transform and work jointly with the US and leveraging strength in resources and in infrastructure that you have in the US and together with Israel. And that's what I'm calling again and again. We do not have enough collaboration with Federal Research Center, unfortunately, and we should, I think.
So that's the perfect segue to my last question before we open it up to the audience. That was the fastest 50 minutes I think I've ever experienced. Every nation or region is in a different position with respect to aligning their public and private interests. And yet, as democracies, we're all facing the same threats from the autocracies. And it seems to me the sum of our nations and regions is far more powerful than any of our countries individually. What sort of a conversation has to go on amongst all of us in order to coordinate not just within our nations, the alignment of the public and private sector, but across this set of allied democracies? Stacey, you want to take it first?
I'll start. We recognize that going forward, any conflict we enter will be one that's done in partnership with others. So there needs to be a lot of conversation. And frankly, because we all have these same needs with respect to innovation, there's an opportunity. And that we are willing in the US to work with others. I mean, let me make sure that everyone knows that part. There may be limitations on what we can do together, but we recognize that there is a shared benefit to being able to put resources in together to build, for example, a better constellation of satellites, a better constellation of collection mechanisms. There are things that we can do that make a lot of sense, that we are pursuing conversations. The challenge is, everyone's got different budgetary cycles and everyone's got different ways that things get approved in their countries, but we've got to be able to work through the regulations that will make it more hard. But again, it's a worthwhile goal and one that we are looking to figure out how to make it work.
David, quickly, do you have an answer?
Yes, well, I work for an organization that is built on this principle that you can't go it alone. And that doesn't only count for collective defense on Article 5, it also counts for value-based technology, for common innovation. So the Diana and the NATO Innovation Fund is 30 allies putting €1 billion into common innovation, and they haven't even claimed that they need a Justratur in their own country. Now that's partnership and alliances, and we really need them in this new era that we're going to.
Andre?
Taking the example, and never wasting a good crisis, is look at what happened in Europe. When you were going to Estonia or to Finland or to Poland in the last 10 years, what is happening right now in Ukraine was almost scripted. But surprisingly, many countries did not want to listen. So the value of partnership, I think, is, and have true equilibrated partnership is definitely realized. I think what democracies need to do is maybe collectively think about, what democracy 2.0 looks like. I know there's a lot of debate in the US about industrial policy. I would relate that to what we have in the military. A clear mission, but like the chief scientist said, don't tell your commanders on the ground what they need to do, because you will always be late and you will always not understand the thing. So, but the sense of mission, often we are micromanaging, but where is the sense of purpose? And what will success look like is if we get the 40 countries that did not vote for the Ukraine war, if we get much more the new non-aligned world on board, it will not be a club that loves to talk to each other, but it's going to be really addressing, I'd say, more humanity. And I think it's something which is vastly shared throughout the world.
Ami, any views on it?
Yes. My take is that the digital transformation, combined with artificial intelligence, moving like a bullet train, is so fast. And what is true today will not be true and will not be good, will not be even effective tomorrow. No country alone, as big as US and as big as Europe, I would argue, can do it on its own. I think the European organization of Horizon 2020 in the previous program, Horizon Europe in current program, that Israel is participating as associated country. Some structure that combine the best of the best in the academia, in the industry, in the government, but not only European, but democratic countries, US, Japan, Israel, India, all of that in a program that will be strategic and will take on the leading edge technology, because we cannot let the autocratic system to be ahead of us on technology. We cannot.
So we've probably got time for a couple of questions here. Let me open the floor. I think I've got one right up. One of the benefits of sitting up front, you're the first person that we identify. We've got a runner coming over with the microphone right beside you now. And if you could just give your name and affiliation. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. I'm Jason Xu, originally from Taiwan, formerly served as a legislator in Taiwan, overlooking the defense program and technology. And currently I'm a senior fellow at Harvard, also studying the geopolitics and semiconductor. My question is regarded to how would you go about advising Taiwan setting up a defense innovation unit as we think through the challenges and adversaries that Taiwan is facing? And our defense program is somewhat not current with the challenges that we face. And obviously, we are looking at asymmetrical strategy, or position ourselves as the porcupine defense strategy. But how do we mobilize and incentivize private sector? For example, for TSMC to work directly with the U.S. defense sector to produce secure chips. And how do we go about supporting Taiwan to create a defense innovation program 2.0? And I want to tell this from my personal account too, because I served in the Air Force for 2 years as an intelligence officer. And our Air Force is completely exhausted with the amount of the warplanes China is sending to Taiwan whenever there is some sort of signal. And completely we are just undernumbered and underpowered by the scale and the budget of China. So we need to think more creatively and innovatively about it, mobilizing private sector, the chip maker, innovation companies to that. So just wanted to throw this question to you all and see if we can come up with some ideas together. Thank you.
Well, it's not the first time I've been asked how you build a DIU. I think Bob Work asked me that a long time ago. David, why don't you take that one?
Thanks. I'll give you the Charter of Diana as a start after this. Now, I think that modern warfare is a whole of society effort. And I think if we look at Ukraine, then we see some great examples there where the whole of society, the whole business community, all sectors of government are working towards a singular aim. How do we create success on the ground for the armed forces of Ukraine? Now, what we should try to do is to replicate that effort, harnessing all that talent, but in a pre-war scenario. The efforts that we're taking at NATO are aimed at that. How do we get the engagement of the brains that we have, of the creativity that's in society, and funnel some of it towards the efforts for defense? And there's a lot of ways to do that, but it starts with motivation. And I think at this moment in time in Taiwan, that the urgency that is felt among the population is at a level that will enable the government to address this talent and put it to good use, because you have a tremendous creative and industrial industry and talent and population at your service.
Yeah, I think that the proximity to TSMC gives you an inherent advantage for fabless semi companies to be developed. I think you've got unique opportunities around packaging, new architectures, whether it's stackables or the next-gen chiplet designs. I think that Taiwan's uniquely positioned to lead in those areas. I don't think it should be any problem attracting funding for those sorts of initiatives. I think it's the sort of thing that American venture capitalists will look at it, and private equity, I think, around the world would look at it. In terms of setting up your own defense or intelligence organization to do investing, that's a much longer conversation. It really depends on what effect you want to have with it. Do you want more companies? Do you want companies that are specifically targeting what you need from a defense perspective? Depending on what you need will really color what you craft and how you build that institution. Unfortunately, I'm looking at the clock and Ely's giving me the stink eye. I think that as nations, we need to create a narrative that brings the private sector into the fold. And conversations around the Ukraine, conversations around China, we'll do that to some extent. I continue to believe that a longer-term vision for society is a more compelling message for the private sector. Solve for health, solve for food security, solve for energy. That's what the private sector will, I think, rally around. And if we can do that, by the way, those are the same technologies as we've been talking about up here that you need to have defense and, heaven forbid, offensive capabilities. I think it's the same set of technologies, but I think packaging the messaging for the private sector is very important. And so with that, Please join me in thanking this esteemed panel. That was a wonderful conversation. Thank you.